Over the past 150 years, there have been many texts published critical of capitalism. First came the foundational critiques, then the revised expansions, the galvanizing polemics, the popular distillations, and countless applications to current social, political, and economic trends. But in all that time, there have been none so vivid, none so illustrative, none so excoriating as the one that came in 1991.
Honey, I'm home. Back from another soul-sucking day at work. Jeez.
Give me juice! Now!
Hey, I'm not your slave. Where is Fran, anyway?
Dinosaurs is a half-hour television sitcom that ran for 65 episodes from April 1991 to October 94. It's been said that at the time of its production, it was the single most expensive half-hour sitcom ever made, owing to the complex full-body animatronic suits created by the Jim Henson Company. The show centered on the Sinclair family. There's breadwinner Earl, homemaker Fran, eldest son Robbie, middle child Charlene, and newborn baby...
Hi, I'm the baby, brand new, just out. Gotta love me, come on, gotta love me.
They're a suburban, single-income, working-class family dominated by Earl's frustrations at work, Fran's struggles at home, and the preoccupations of Robbie and Charlene's socialization and schooling. Not to mention having to constantly explain how the world works to Baby.
Why are we happy?
Well, because it's an Ash Day, we get to stay home from school.
Yeah, I get to stay home from school? You're a baby, you don't go to school yet.
Yeah.
I wanna go to school!
The pilot episode does a great job of establishing the core dynamics, which would go on to become the source of most of the major conflicts throughout the show. Earl is a blue-collar conservative who loves his wife and kids, but doesn't want anything to do with them after a long day's work.
You really should ask me about my day, Earl.
Look, Fran, I say this with all love and everything, but I don't give a damn about your day.
Fran is the proverbial housewife who struggles to maintain order in the home and compel Earl to do more work around the house.
You're way behind on paying the bills.
Hey, I'm not.
Look at this heating bill. It's stamped pay now or die.
At least they're still giving us a choice.
Robbie is the rebellious teenager who doesn't want anything to do with his parents and questions nearly everything they say.
Ow! I knew it.
Says here you don't apply yourself. Says here you got potential.
That's a cheap motivational ploy. What, you don't see through that?
Charlene is the conformist who generally follows the path of least resistance, at least until the later episodes.
Clean it up.
No, you clean it up.
I gotta go upstairs.
I gotta go first. Wait.
And Baby is the proverbial wild card, just as capable of warmth and introspection as he is chaos.
Daddy! Daddy. Not the mama.
But as good as the show was at establishing these dynamics, it also did a great job of upsetting them, with nearly every episode featuring some new set of circumstances that threatened to upend their way of life.
It's been a busy year, Earl. First you had to learn the mating dance, then Mother moved in, then the kids got that pet caveman, then there was Robbie's howling, then Charlene's tail grew in, then we all went on that game show. It seems like nearly every
Yes,
week...
I know.
Most episodes see at least one member of the family getting enmeshed in some wider social issue, like when Robbie questions his family's compulsory meat eating.
What? Why do we have to eat animals every night? You know, it's possible to get nutrition from vegetables. Uh-oh.
Or when Fran wonders why she's expected to marry any dinosaur big enough to kill and eat Earl.
Hi, Fran. Gosh, you look gorgeous. I can't wait to bite your husband's head off.
Gary, I love Earl. He's the only male I've ever loved, and no matter what happens here today, he's the only male I ever will love.
When that happens, there's usually one member of the family who's ready to abandon the old ways, and another member, usually Earl, who insists on sticking to tradition, even when he's the one who stands to lose the most.
I was hoping to avoid a slow, lingering death if possible.
On the whole, the Sinclairs were only ever remarkable in just how unremarkable they were, and I loved them for it.
Dad, I'm begging you to understand I have no potential.
None of them have any grand ambitions or especially unique talents.
I got a C+ on my astronomy test.
Well, that's very nice, dear. That's a whole plus above your personal best.
No, you don't understand, Mom. I overachieved.
They usually resolve conflict by making simple concessions within the immediate family circle, not by changing society at large.
Would you two cut it out? You're making me sick to my stomach.
And while many episodes do see the Sinclairs briefly elevated to the national spotlight, like when baby Sinclair grows a golden horn and is temporarily heralded as the next messiah,
I made a big poop.
the old status quo is usually back by the end of each episode.
The horn, first thought to be a portent of a golden age for all dinosaur civilization, is now believed to be just one of those things.
The most the audience can usually hope for is at least one of the Sinclairs, again usually Earl, learning to appreciate his family in a new way.
Daddy.
But inter-family conflict wasn't the only source of trouble. Over the course of 65 episodes, the show managed to explore a truly staggering number of social issues without ever being labeled a political show. Such topics include, but are not limited to, elder abuse, televangelism, religious freedom, the rights of indigenous peoples, recreational drug use, pollution, the objectification of women, gender roles, animal rights, climate change, corporate crime, government intervention in parenting, steroids, immigration, squatters' rights, environmental activism, racism, cultural war scapegoating, police brutality, consumerism, government censorship, the Gulf War, election rigging, sex education, targeted advertising, cultural appropriation, the media industrial complex, commodity fetishism, and even the Anita Hill hearings.
Before I start, I'd just like to say that I'm grateful to the We Say So Corporation for granting me a fair hearing.
I have over 100 witnesses that'll testify that for the past 22 years, you have in fact been a prostitute!
I can't believe they use that kind of language on television. Don't they know that kids are watching?
One episode pulled triple duty as the homosexuality, marijuana, and communism episode.
You're one of them? Are you sure? I mean, how long have you known?
Well, I always kind of suspected. Ever since I was 12, whenever I see vegetables, I feel kind of hungry.
Broccoli! I'm gonna ask you something. I'm gonna ask you straight out. Are you now, or have you ever been an herbivore?
That's just one episode.
When I was 14, I experimented with some lettuce.
But so long as Baby kept hitting Earl with a frying pan, the showrunners were free to explore as many hot-button issues as they liked.
I love you.
Or at least, that's the common wisdom. Fans of the show, pop culture commentators, and even the showrunners themselves have all said that the only reason the show was able to explore all these issues is because of its kiddie aesthetics, with the social commentary sprinkled in as like a hidden bonus for adults.
You gotta see this puppet show. It's terrific.
Earl, that's for kids.
Yeah, you'd think that because they're puppets. So the show seems to have a children's aesthetic. Yet the dialogue is unquestionably sharp-edged, witty, and thematically skewed to adults.
But I think there's something else going on here. See, in all of its 65 episodes, Dinosaurs never named the actual source of all the Sinclair's problems. It pointed out a lot of different issues, but it never once identified the root cause. And if it had, I personally think it would have been canceled a whole lot sooner. So, what was the source? Was it consumerism?
How could you throw away your entire education for a piece of clothing?
I look great. That's all I need to know.
Sexism?
Mom's got a point. I mean, it is kind of sexist to expect her to change all the diapers just because she's a female.
Well, we don't want to be sexist now, do we, son? Here, knock yourself out.
Corporate crime?
We're executives in a large, respected corporation. We don't eat our enemies. We have lawyers for that.
Hang on, someone call a lawyer.
Flat earthers?
This is the little girl who believes that the world is round, flying in the face of everything our society holds as sacred truth.
Well, we're still just naming symptoms at this point. The real root problem, the foundational flaw with all of Pangaean society, was in fact capitalism.
The world may be coming to an end.
Well, that's a fourth quarter problem. We'll drop a bomb on that bridge when we come to it. Right now, my biggest problem is trying to figure out what to do with all this money.
Part 1. Ground rules. Okay, so in preparation for this video, I went out and talked to a few self-described capitalists to try and figure out what people think capitalism actually is, and I got some very helpful responses. First and foremost, capitalism is not the same thing as commerce. Commerce is the buying and selling of goods and services through a common medium of exchange, which happens in every economic system. Capitalism, communism, and every ism in between. Capitalism isn't like the only economic system with money in it. Capitalism is a very specific kind of economic system in which one segment of the population makes money by doing stuff, be it tree pushing, processing paperwork, administering medical care, or hosting TV shows, and another, much smaller segment of the population makes money by owning stuff. How do you make money by owning stuff? You rent it. You rent apartments, you rent factories, you rent land, and then let someone else figure out how to do something productive with it. Sometimes the people who own all the stuff will appear to get very involved in the production process, hiring workers, negotiating pay rates, setting company policy, but it's still two fundamentally different ways of making money. One group does the work, and the other gatekeeps the means of production. As such, much of the work that capitalists do has very little to do with actual production, and more to do with making sure they keep making money as fast as possible.
Yeah, couldn't you take another appliance instead?
Sorry, the boss likes to take the one that puts you under the most pressure.
At this point, there's still so much more theory I want to discuss, like how a simple class division like this can be responsible for everything from our diminishing health returns amidst an ongoing worldwide pandemic to the resurgence of flat earthers in the 21st century. But I swore this wasn't just going to be a video about capitalism, because ultimately, I am not an economist. I'm a paleo media super freak. So this is still very much a video about dinosaurs. And Dinosaurs presents a decidedly unacademic, non-theoretical, boots-on-the-ground view of capitalism. How does it look to your average everyday working class Pangaean? How does it affect their daily lives? And what can anyone ever possibly do about it? You don't even have to agree that capitalism is bad in order to watch this video. The only two things we need to agree on right up front is that firstly, the society presented in Dinosaurs is indeed a capitalist economy, and second, that no one in the show ever seriously considered any alternative. Part 2. How Capitalism Destroyed Pangaea. Let's start with Earl's job, one of the major flashpoints of conflict throughout the show. Earl hates what he does. He's a tree pusher for the We Say So Corporation, tasked with felling an entire forest to make way for a new housing development, which still isn't built by the end of the show, by the way. The work is difficult, the pay is bad, and Earl's boss, Mr. Richfield, is an abusive megalomaniac who rules the company through fear and exploitation. The only reason Earl puts up with it is because he needs the paycheck.
Obviously, you forget what today is, friend.
It's paycheck day.
Paycheck day. The day I get my check.
Now, at first blush, Earl seems nominally proud of his work, like when Robbie is assigned to tree-pushing duty by the all-powerful job wizard, and Earl can't wait to show him the ropes.
Hey, Sinclair and Sons, unskilled laborers.
But when Robbie recontextualizes what the job actually is and what it actually amounts to,
Dad, has it ever occurred to you that you guys are just bulldozers with hats?
Earl promptly has a nervous breakdown.
No, my career is a sham. My life has no meaning.
All Earl does is knock down trees. He doesn't shape the lumber, he doesn't build the houses, he can't point to anything he creates except an empty field.
Once we've knocked them down, there'll be strip malls, discount membership warehouses, 8-lane highways, and identical tract homes as far as the eye can see.
This is perhaps a familiar feeling. The idea that we don't actually care about the work that we do, that it's unfulfilling and arbitrary. There's a disconnect between the considerable amount of effort that we put into each workday and the purpose behind all that effort. Earl is simply trading time and energy for a paycheck, and it drives him into a deep depression whenever he's forced to think about it.
A bulldozer's just a dumb machine doing the same stupid job over and over with someone else at its driver's seat telling it what to do.
There's a word for this. Well, 3 words. Alienation of labor. See, people used to be involved in every step of the production process, but then capitalist notions of mechanized workforces popularized by people like Henry Ford reduced former craftspeople into mere cogs on an assembly line. It's a way of optimizing production at the expense of people's personal satisfaction and well-being. To make matters worse, Earl is a Fordist worker living in a post-Fordian economy. Was that too much? Did I go too fast? All right, let me explain. See, as bad as Henry Ford's system was for our collective well-being, mechanizing people on an assembly line in order to maximize production, workers could still usually count on at least staying with the same company throughout their careers, with a fair bit of job security, and regular raises along the way. Think blue-collar union types in the 1950s and 60s. Yeah, the job might have sucked, but at least it took care of everything else they needed in life. Earl seems to expect that kind of career, dedicating his professional life to but one task, performed faithfully, with the understanding understanding that he gets to keep his job and have a little extra spending cash along the way. But even before the show started airing, America had already transitioned into a largely post-Fordian economy, which is not the sort of economic system that is designed to support Earl. Post-Fordian workplaces are very broadly characterized by things like small batch production, targeted marketing, the flexible specialization of both the workforce and assembly line, and the rise in company auditing practices over actual company practices, which all coincided with the rise of automated labor and new information technologies throughout the 70s and 80s. What this means is that companies now have instant access to a near infinite supply of consumer data, so markets tend to change faster than it takes most people to adjust. This is why millennials tend to suffer so many more career laterals than our boomer predecessors. Companies are demanding more specialization and more flexibility, so we have to diversify our skill sets while at the same time being rejected by companies who've decided that they no longer need employees who do what we do.
Oh, well, sorry to lose you, Sinclair. All these years.
But, sir, I like this company. I always dreamed I'd go somewhere with this company.
Don't dream, Sinclair. No dreams for you.
Well, if Earl's suffering so much at work, why can't he just learn some new skills and get a new job? Well, when exactly? When is he going to learn these new skills? After he comes home from a full day's work with a wife and 3 kids to take care of? What's he supposed to do, go to night school? He actually did go to night school in one episode, but it was a one-off thing. He couldn't sustain it long enough to learn a whole new trade. But I think we can all agree that the expectation for him to just learn a new trade in his spare time is a tall order to fill. Well, that's the whole point of capitalism, isn't it? Only the hardest working, most skilled, and highly relevant professionals ever rise to the top. Well, even if that's true, and that's a big if, demonstrably false if you ask me, you have now pinpointed one of my least favorite things about capitalist ideology. Even if it's working exactly as described, it still only works out for the exceptional, with everyone else either crushed under its heel or scrambling to get by. Whereas I dream of an economy that works for everyone, even the mediocre.
I am so hungry.
I mean, what is the point of all this development anyway if everyone still has to work as hard as possible just to get by? I want to live in a society where a lifetime of back-breaking labor and rapacious economic one-upmanship isn't the only way to reach retirement age. Well, alright, maybe it is too much for just one person to bear. But then the whole burden doesn't have to fall on Earl. Maybe his family could help take some of the weight off his shoulders. Okay, let's talk family. Earl's relationship with his family is one of the show's main sources of conflict, a nearly episodic source of frustration.
Nobody's gonna tell me when and where I can parent. This is my house. These are my kids, and I love them.
Hey, Dad?
Shut up, I'm talking.
But his family also receives very many declarations of love and heroic acts of self-sacrifice.
It's my family. Because without them, I'm nothing.
So what's going on here? Does Earl love his family or not? Well, I think Earl and his family are the victims of a manufactured discordance that capitalism is especially good at fostering. Namely, families are one of our greatest sources of relief and comfort, and also one of the biggest demands on our time and energy.
What?
See, capitalism needs families as a salve for the psychic wounds inflicted by anarchic social economic conditions, while simultaneously undermining family life by denying parents time with children and putting intolerable stress on couples as they become the exclusive source of affective consolation for each other. That's Mark Fisher, by the way. Remember that name, we're going to talk about him more later. Basically, Earl's family is the sole source of emotional support in his life, but he's also under enormous pressure to take care of them in all the ways that society doesn't.
We may not have heat vision, but we go to back-breaking, mind-numbing jobs so you can grow up comfortably and have some nice things in your life.
It's one of the most pervasive dynamics of the show, and I'd argue, of capitalism.
Kids don't appreciate shit.
Something worth remembering here is that the nuclear family is not some ancient institution. It's barely a century old. You'd think the word nuclear in there would be a big hint. But every time someone suggests an alternative or even adjustment to the nuclear family, be it multiple generations living under one roof, platonic friends buying real estate together, polycules, the establishment loses its mind, often quite literally calling it a threat to civilization as we know it. And here's the thing. It is, but not in the way they say. Non-nuclear families aren't a threat to civilization, they're a threat to capitalism. Nuclear families are good for capitalism because they keep people exhausted. Resources are spread too thin. Too many burdens left up to too few people. Blood relations getting overemphasized at the expense of community. This all leads to Earl being too tired to put in the effort required to cultivate a rewarding domestic life, even though he needs a rewarding domestic life in order to survive.
How was your day, dear?
Compared to what, Fran? Compared to walking off a cliff, falling 10,000 feet, but living just long enough to see that first vulture swoop down and pick out my eyes? It's a tie. Give me a beer.
And I know some of this might sound far-fetched, like Surge. Family structures are not dictated by the economy. But it's not so much that capitalism dictates family structures so much as it subsumes them. Some people decided 100 years ago to give nuclear families a shot, and capitalism went, yeah, I can work with that. One of the ways the Sinclairs eventually do alter the family unit is when they let Grandma Ethel move in. And while the show does love to play up the hostility between Ethel and Earl,
So I think the sensible thing for us to do is to clear the air. I hate you.
his parental burdens do go down as soon as she moves in. But even this was viewed as something of an earth-shaking change.
Times are changing, Earl.
Today? Do they have to change today?
And only begrudgingly permitted because Ethel was no longer seen as a potential profit generator for society anyway. The very concept of retirement in capitalist countries is dictated by the notion that we're only finally permitted to stop working when we're on death's door. Bottom line, Earl needs more support, and capitalism is in no position to provide it, in part because capitalism is the opposite of community, which is precisely why there's so little of it here in America. I mean Pangea. But enough about Earl. Let's talk about what the other adult in the room isn't getting from capitalism.
You're getting pretty good at that thing.
When I was a kid, I always thought of Fran as like the polar opposite of Earl, what with her devotion to family consuming her every waking thought, and Earl wanting nothing to do with them. But now I see them as two sides of the same coin. They're both stretched too thin, faces pushed too close to the grindstone. The effort they spend just to keep the kids alive ends up using all the energy that they need in order to actually enjoy them. The only difference is that Fran tends to internalize her frustrations, whereas Earl simply projects them onto Fran. So it only makes sense that most of the Fran-centric episodes usually feature some kind of breakdown.
Oh, cook and clean, clean and cook. That's all I ever do. These are the tools of my trade.
Well, how's my favorite married couple?
Fran, put the knife down.
By the second episode of the show, Fran is already so exhausted and demoralized from taking care of baby 24/7 that she can barely get out of bed.
It's the middle of the night. Why don't you sleep?
No concept of time. Wide awake.
So Earl decides he's going to try and spice up their love life by relearning the mating dance he used to woo Fran back when they were dating.
Chin, chin, chin. Yeah!
But when he finally wakes her up to perform the dance, it doesn't work.
Fran?
One romantic gesture isn't enough to overcome all the exhaustion she feels after taking care of the kids all day. She doesn't just need acknowledgement, she needs someone to improve her material conditions.
Your problem is just that you're tired all the time.
But then when baby wakes up that night...
I'll get it.
No, sweetheart. You sleep. You need your sleep.
Earl offers to go downstairs instead of Fran.
What?
And he winds up using the mating dance to calm baby down. And that's what finally impresses Fran.
Look, he fell asleep.
That's the best mating dance I've ever seen.
But this is still just a temporary fix. Earl's tank is already empty by the time he gets home every day, and he proves extremely unreliable when it comes to any domestic duties.
You've done nothing for days. If you're going to be around the house anyway, I could sure use some help cleaning the bathroom.
Franny, the four-leggers took away my job. I'm not about to turn around and deprive you of yours.
In fact, pretty much every time Fran tries to expand her role outside the domestic sphere, everything goes to pot. In the season 2 episode Fran Live, Fran gets a job as a TV host giving out relationship advice, and Earl promptly flips out because he doesn't want to do any housework.
You were out at some job I didn't even know about, when you should have been here putting dinner on the table.
The episode ends with Fran getting ousted from her job in favor of a more gimmicky host, but she insists she still wants to keep working, and that the rest of the family will need to pitch in around the house in order to make that happen.
What's in it for us?
Yeah. My happiness, Earl. And if one member of this family isn't happy, then none of us will be.
But then a whole season and a half goes by before they revisit the issue, and it's only when Fran once again reaches her breaking point. At the beginning of the season 3 episode, Honey, I Miss the Kids, Fran snaps.
Your mother gets a lot of satisfaction in her role as wife and mother.
I hate my life. I hate my life. I hate my life. I hate my life.
And decides she's finally gonna go out and get a job for the sake of her own sanity.
Earl! I need a job!
She soon finds a full-time volunteer position that she really likes, but the fact that it's unpaid puts enormous pressure on Earl, who's forced to stay home during the day to take care of the kids and then stay up working the late shift all night at work. The situation is clearly untenable, but rather than simply talking to Fran about it, Earl decides he's gonna try and bond with the kids to make Fran jealous enough to quit. The plan promptly backfires. Twice. First, when Earl's relationship with the kids fails to send Fran into a jealous rage.
Huh?
I thought going to work would be difficult for the kids, but you've more than picked up the slack. Now I can go to work and not even worry.
And second, when Earl realizes that spending time with his kids can be fun.
There's all this cooperation, all this caring. We're like a cooperating, caring unit of some kind.
Like a family?
Yeah, like on TV.
The episode ends when Earl finally admits that he's been driven to the same point of madness that Fran had been, and Fran agrees to go part-time just so long as Earl starts doing his fair share around the house.
You're willing to give up all that?
I'm begging you.
Which he finally seems ready and willing to do.
Bye, little guy. Be good.
Bye, Daddy.
You called me Daddy?
This is a very sweet episode. One of my favorites. It ends with a rare moment of genuine emotional growth and unqualified joy, but it underscores the fact that capitalism isn't set up to work for families, but rather forces them to seek solutions amongst themselves instead of with the conditions of society. One of the reasons I like these episodes so much is because I think they do a great job of dramatizing the fundamental injustice of unpaid domestic labor. Now, sentences like that tend to make certain demographics foam at the mouth. Fundamental injustice of unpaid domestic labor? What, are men supposed to pay their wives to do housework for them? No, of course not. That wouldn't solve anything. How can it be sexist to ask Fran to do housework if Earl is already at work all day paying her bills? I haven't said anything was sexist yet. I don't get how it's so hard for you feminists to understand that every time— Will you just let me finish? Jesus. What, did your favorite sports team just lose or something? Here's the bottom line. Unpaid domestic labor is an exploitation of Fran and Earl. It's not men who are committing the injustice, it's the ruling class. Now don't get me wrong, Earl is a dedicated misogynist who believes that women are somehow biologically predisposed to housework.
Franny, get in here and bring a beer while you're at it. And some pretzels, too.
And I don't want to minimize the damage that that kind of thinking causes. He's a sexist pig through and through.
I see your radical agenda at work here.
What agenda?
You want to get all the wives out of the houses and into the workforce so they're fulfilled. And their husbands have a new respect for them. And the sexes live together in harmony. And then, well, I don't have all the pieces to your diabolical scheme.
But even if Earl were a model feminist, committed to a fully equitable division of labor with Fran, it wouldn't change the fact that, in order to get by, the Sinclairs are still expected to have someone running interference on housework at all times. And the fault there lies not just with Earl, but with capitalist power structures. Now that might sound like a big jump to some viewers, but all I'm doing here is asking two questions. What would actually improve Fran and Earl's situation? And who's inclined to say no?
Don't you point that thing at me!
Gotcha.
Consider the 8-hour workday. Why is the workday 8 hours long? Why do we spend half our waking lives on the clock? It used to be even longer. It used to be 12 hours, then 10, then lots and lots of striking workers died, and it finally got down to 8. But employers were still making some terribly outdated assumptions about their employees' lives. Namely, that all their employees were either male bachelors who didn't have homes to maintain, or married men with wives at home who could do all the cooking and cleaning for free. And even then, the only reason employers were able to get away with this is because A, most of their workers did indeed fit into one category or the other, and B, the wages that they paid tended to reflect the actual cost of maintaining a home. But fast forward over a century and a half, and the situation has completely changed. A woman's marital status has virtually no impact on her labor force participation anymore. Even childbirth only gets the percentage of working women down to 45%. What this means is that the majority of married households, and even half of all households with children, lost their full-time stay-at-home housekeeper over the last century and a half, and yet the workday remains fixed at 8 hours long. And not only that, our wages do not reflect the actual cost of maintaining a home anymore. The average median income will buy you less house now than it did during the Great Depression. The federal minimum wage hasn't budged since 2009, which means it's actually gone down because of inflation.
I can't afford to get my wife a present, and I can't afford to buy my children the things that I'd like to.
Tree pushers get $4 an hour.
You can't implement a workday based on the assumption that everyone has a full-time housekeeper at home, take away that full-time housekeeper, keep the same hours, and lower everyone's pay. Something's gotta give. Why shouldn't it be all our minds?
What am I? I'm a lost soul.
Now I know what some of the capitalist hardliners are thinking. Well, why should companies be forced to shorten the workday or raise wages just because everybody's home life got a little rougher? How is that their problem? Well, setting aside the fact that they're the ones who are largely responsible for the rougher home life, how about because workplace productivity has nearly doubled in the last 50 years? It's true. You could literally cut the workday in half and still get just as much work done as you could in the early 70s. Studies show that almost no one is productive for more than 3 to 5 hours a day anyway, which makes sense. I can't even do things I enjoy for 8 hours straight, so why should I be expected to do things I hate? Say we compromise and cut the workday down to just 6 hours. Think of all you could do with an extra 2 hours every weekday. A daily workout, healthier meals, clean your apartment, watch a movie, play with your kids. I'm not even saying it's possible. I'm saying this is what we're owed. So see, unpaid domestic labor is an expression of misogyny, but both women and men are being exploited. We're all doing too much work for too little pay, and the ruling class is counting on that tension to stay within the home so that they don't have to do anything about it. So with the workplace and home life out of the way, you might think that this is where the anti-capitalist analysis could stop. But you'd be wrong. Something that stays surprisingly consistent throughout the show is the fact that whenever the cops show up, they don't actually make things better.
Charlene Sinclair, you're under arrest for heresy.
They're always prolonging conflict, not actually preventing it. The one time the Sinclairs call the cops on purpose is when Robbie, Charlene, and Baby are all kidnapped by this little hermit guy living under the house, and when they do, the cops only try to escalate conflict.
Go with me! You don't have the guts! I dare you! Go ahead, scaredy pants! Do it! Do it! Do it! He's clearly unstable. We'd better move in.
This episode aired barely a year after Waco, by the way. After all, something's got to justify those overinflated police budgets.
You were right to call the authorities, Mrs. Sinclair. When citizens take the law into their own hands, we police have very little to do.
This is how every police budget operates under capitalism. Both parties throw stacks of cash at the cops, and if crime rates go down, they say they need to increase police budgets in order to continue the trend. And if crime rates go up, they say they still need to increase police budgets in order to reverse the trend. Ad nauseum, ad infinitum. And this isn't just some crazy leftist theory. You can look it up. Police budgets have more than tripled in the last 50 years, regardless of whatever the actual crime rate was doing. While 1 in every 6 kids in the United States lives in poverty, police precincts operate with budgets that rival the military spending of whole entire nations. If the US police were a military, it would be the 3rd best funded military in the entire world, bested only by China, and of course, the US military. And I figure so long as we're spending all of this money, we might as well ask ourselves, what's the purpose of police? It's an honest question. What are they for? Is it to prevent crime? I think that's probably the most common answer, right? Cops prevent crime. Do they, though? America's crime rate is hardly stellar. Our murder rate is basically only better than countries with active war zones in them, or the ones that are headed by right-wing dictatorships that have almost all been at least partially funded by the CIA. This despite the fact that America spends more on policing than all but one other country spends on its entire military, and incarcerates more of its citizens than any other nation on Earth. That's both total population and per capita. So if the purpose of police is to prevent crime, then they are patently, categorically, and unequivocally not fulfilling that purpose. So why do ever-increasing police budgets keep getting rubber-stamped by Congress? Well, while cops may not be very good at preventing crime, they are very good at protecting capital, the financial interests of the ruling class. Cops are important to capitalist economies because they protect private property, which is the only kind of crime that they ever take any proactive steps to prevent.
You're under arrest! What for? Copyright infringement.
And this isn't just some crazy leftist theory either. It is literally a Supreme Court decision. In Castle Rock v. Gonzalez, the Supreme Court ruled that cops have no obligation to protect people, after police refused to enforce a restraining order which resulted in the murders of 3 children. You know what they do have an obligation to perform, though? Evictions. When I was scripting this video, the US government was actively cutting funding for everything from baby formula to COVID protections while simultaneously rubber stamping overinflated police budgets and extra munitions packages for Ukraine. And people saw this and said, why would the government continue to bolster the police state instead of addressing our material needs? You want to know the answer? They're bolstering the police budget because they're not addressing our material needs. Militarizing the police is their response to COVID, the baby formula shortage, climate change, school shootings. At some point, the public is bound to simply try and take what they've been denied for so long, but then that's where a multi-billion-dollar police force designed to protect private property comes in. You can't put all the things that people need in order to survive in an unregulated, profit-driven free market without securing a monopoly on violence first.
Disagreeing with the majority in a democracy?
So, pretty bleak picture, right? Earl's miserable at work, he's miserable at home, even though his family is one of the most important sources of emotional support in his life, and the state's monopoly on violence is only on hand to reinforce the same old status quo that makes everyone miserable.
Robert Sinclair, you are under arrest for malicious thinking and assault on conventional wisdom.
Oh, and lest we forget, the world's ending too. Environmentalism crops up in dinosaurs a lot more often than your average sitcom.
It's the toxic fumes. These things are leaking all over the place.
Yeah.
And what's worth noting here is that the blame isn't put on individual people, but on corporations.
I can no longer work for a company so hell-bent on the destruction of our planet.
In the Season 2 episode, Power Erupts, Robbie comes up with a science project that promises to revolutionize Pangaea with free, unlimited clean energy.
Okay, the steam coming off it gets trapped here, flows down here, where it not only heats the house, but powers a turbine to generate electricity.
And at first, the We Say So Corporation tries to discredit him with a massive smear campaign.
But now there's a high school student living right here in Pangaea who would have you believe you can get energy from a mountain.
Oh, yes, like the public is that easily manipulated. Ow, ow, hey, suck tar!
But when Robbie doesn't back down, they decide to try and buy the idea off of him just so that they can squash it. Earl pleads with Robbie to sell the idea and make them all rich, but Robbie refuses.
I won't sell to you, Mr. Richfield. I'd rather give it to the elders for free than sell it to you for $1 million.
This is just a tactic, right?
But in the end, the corporation wins. Instead of buying Robbie's idea, the We Say So Corporation buys the whole damn volcano.
When asked by DNN if the new owners would still allow Mount Thunder to be capped by the Free Energy Dome, a We Say So spokesman said the volcano would be available just as soon as a series of safety tests have been concluded. Approximately 100 million years from now.
And if you're wondering how anyone could possibly put a stop to that, well, there are political and economic philosophies that say that all land should be public. Eliminate the profit motive. Make it so that nobody can ruin a piece of land for anybody else. That's what most leftists mean when they say abolish private property. They're not saying you can't own anything. They're saying no one can own everything. But this runs entirely contrary to capitalism. It seeks to commodify everything. The water we drink, the food we eat, the very earth beneath our feet. At the time of this recording, the only two things that nobody can try and sell you is basically just air and sunlight. Although capitalism will go ahead and ruin clean air for you and eliminate green spaces that might make sunlight more tolerable. That's the other thing about capitalism. Capitalism is interested in monetizing problems, not solving them. Like in the season 4 episode, Variations on a Theme Park. When too many tree pushers drop dead from exhaustion and the government mandates 2 weeks mandatory vacation, the We Say So Corporation promptly opens up a company theme park with hundreds of predatory microtransactions.
Hey, this is a payphone.
Have now spent 20 cents, 40
What?
cents, 50 cents.
Hey, now put that down.
60
What?
And if the powers that be don't have a solution to sell you, capitalism is, after all, entirely incompatible with any notion of sustainability, they'll just deflect blame instead.
It sounds to me like it's high time that the government stepped in and started to regulate these big companies.
Whoa! How dare you blame the company, you mewling pack of ingrates! It's not the company's fault! It's never the company's fault!
Know who coined the phrase carbon footprint? It was BP. They want people to blame themselves for the destruction of the environment and have been astroturfing that message for decades. But Dinosaurs wasn't having it. The exploitation of land and the people living on it was always pinned to corporate financial interests. In the season 3 episode The Discovery, Earl stumbles upon a land previously unknown to dinosaur kind and promptly claims it for himself.
I hereby claim this land in the name of Earl Sneed Sinclair.
But then the We Say So Corporation swoops in with plans to develop it.
Well, that's an awful lot of land you just got for yourself there. Have you thought about how you might rape and denude it?
Rape and denude it, sir?
Forgive me, industry jargon. I meant develop it for the public good.
This is how capitalism actually got started, by the way, when the ruling class, which is to say the literal ruling monarchs of 16th century Europe, started claiming public land for their own private use. This episode isn't even primarily about the protection of the environment, but the rights of indigenous peoples, when Robbie and Baby learn that the land isn't undiscovered after all, but that a substantial number of cave people already live there. The financial incentive to privatize the land is rightfully pinpointed as the source of conflict.
You must go now. Tell Dinosaur what you have seen. Tell them, cave people want only to preserve what is already here.
But in what was sort of a running theme throughout the show, the corporation still ends up on top. Earl gives up his claim to the land when he can't afford to pay the new tax.
Now that this area has been officially discovered, it can be officially taxed.
And all the cave people are forcibly relocated, with the We Say So Corporation left to do whatever they like with the land.
A brand new baseball stadium will be built on the caveman's sacred burial grounds and will serve as the home for a new franchise named, appropriately enough, the Central Pangea Cavemen.
The problem here is the profit motive. The goal of simply making as much money as fast as possible into perpetuity with literally all other considerations secondary. Capitalism is the profit motive elevated to a biological imperative, making money with the same ferocity usually reserved for breathing. Most capitalists that I've spoken to seem to take as a given that optimizing goods and services is how you maximize profit. But that is not... That's just not borne out by the evidence. It's just wrong. Sometimes it means optimizing goods and services. Sometimes it means satisfying the most customers. But not all the time. In fact, I'd argue it's never actually necessary. The most profitable companies are usually just the biggest exploiters. A fact which was not lost on Dinosaurs.
Did Captain Impressive trachea plug, sir? That's clearly labeled ages 12 and older. Why, no challenge is too great when you attack it with imagination, ingenuity, and a relaxed attitude toward building codes. Listen to yourself, selfishly thinking of the future when the present is at stake.
It is a crime against nature, an act of spiritual and moral bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy? Are you nuts? We're raking it in.
Oh, and if you're wondering why Earl has a British accent here,
You actually take pleasure in killing trees.
it's because he got struck by lightning and swapped souls with a tree. So to sum up, capitalism is an economic system that makes Earl miserable at work, miserable at home, forces him to buy stuff that used to be free that he needed in order to survive, actively kills the planet, and will bash his skull in if he ever tries to change the current system. So I guess now the only question is, if capitalism really is to blame for all these problems, how come no one in the show ever said so? Part 3. How capitalism convinced us it was the only option. So here's something that both capitalists and anti-capitalists should be able to agree on. Capitalism consistently presents itself as the only option. Certainly the only good option. I mean, what are we, a bunch of communists? That's usually about as far as the debate goes in public discourse. We're either capitalists or communists, free market entrepreneurs or fascist authoritarians, Henry Ford or Adolf Hitler. Actually, that's a bad example. They were really good friends. Most pro-capitalists are happy to concede that capitalism might not be perfect, sure, but it's still the best option, with the alternatives presented as such comically evil farces that capitalism simply becomes the default. Mark Fisher is a British political theorist who popularized a term for this: capitalist realism. The idea that we don't question capitalism simply because we assume, or simply because we're told, that it's the only option. Fisher said that one of the primary symptoms of capitalist realism is an inability to imagine any possible futures, and that is Earl to a T.
How can you sit here on your butt watching TV while the whole world is falling apart around you?
Falling apart?
Yeah.
I get my mail every day. I get 170 cable channels. I can buy beer in a bottle, potato chips in a can. My world's just fine.
He's hopelessly beholden to tradition, even when he has no clue why the tradition exists in the first place.
Why?
Why what?
Why do we do this?
We've been doing it for 1,000,000 years.
Why?
It is written in the sacred book of dinosaurs.
In these cases, it's usually Robbie who offers the most pushback.
But it just doesn't make sense, Dad. Today I'm just a kid, but tomorrow I climb up the mountain and yell at the moon, and that makes me a grown-up?
And the solution is usually just a simple compromise within the family circle, like when Robbie decides to howl at the moon simply because it makes his dad happy.
I don't know why I believe in it. I just do.
I understand, Dad.
But what causes people to not question tradition in the first place? Fisher said it wasn't so much apathy or cynicism, so much as what he called reflexive impotence. Capitalism has been the only economic system that America has ever known for 2.5 generations now. If nothing ever changes, people eventually forget that anything ever can. And there isn't anyone in Pangaea more invested in making sure that nothing ever changes than the dinosaurs that are already in power. In the Season 2 episode, And the Winner Is, we get our first look at Pangaean electoral politics. In a word, they're a sham, designed to give citizens the illusion of choice whilst ensuring the preservation of the same old status quo. In this episode, BP Richfield nominates himself for the role of Chief Elder, and then appoints Earl to run as a patsy against him.
What would you do about this disastrous situation?
And here's the most telling line from the episode.
Fortunately, the big money interests who control my party also control the other party.
Now at first, this might sound like some straight up Illuminati shit. Some shadowy force working behind the scenes to control both parties. Oh please, give me a break. But it should be relatively uncontroversial to identify what both parties publicly, actively support. No prizes for guessing. The answer is capitalism.
This is a capitalist country. The government does not make baby formula, nor should it.
That's why nothing in American politics has changed for the last 40 years. They've already created the system that they want. Their only goal now is to keep the operation going, both Democrats and Republicans. On the Republican side, you've got Make America Great Again, which is a call to return to some imaginary prelapsarian utopia, usually before the Civil Rights Act was passed, or before same-sex marriage was a thing, or when redlining was still legal. And on the Democratic side, you've got Nothing Will Fundamentally Change. Neither party is interested in the future. And it's killing us. How long can a culture persist without the new? What happens if the young are no longer capable of producing surprises? Tradition counts for nothing when it is no longer contested and modified. A culture that is merely preserved is no culture at all. By the end of the episode, Earl decides to go public with the news that he's only been chosen to lose.
He picked me to run against him and told me I had to lose.
Mr. Sinclair, do you know what you're saying?
Not usually. That's the whole point.
Are you asking your supporters to vote for Mr. Richfield?
No. See, I may be a boob, but he's absolute evil.
What? Evil? What are you doing, you backstabbing bucket of pus?
You are evil, and you know it.
And this winds up generating a massive write-in campaign for the beloved moderator of the debate, who was then elected Chief Elder, with the implication being that the position itself will soon corrupt him too.
That's you, Edward. Any comment?
Once again, a bored and apathetic electorate has been forced to... Huh? Well, dress me up and call me Sally. I'm the new elder. Maybe the system does work after all.
But it doesn't stop there. Another thing that politicians do in order to keep both us and Pangaea from imagining any future without capitalism is by stoking the fires of so-called culture wars in order to distract us. And they're getting very good at it. In the Season 3 episode Green Card, Pangaea is hit with a massive recession, owing to the fact that the We Say So Corporation has run out of trees to knock down and subsequently fires all their tree pushers.
Not a tree left in sight. Now what does that say to you?
It says, good work, valued employees. Thanks for a job well done.
Wrong! It says, get lost, you worthless drones. You've outlived your usefulness.
But they still manage to make sure the blame doesn't fall to them.
Doesn't it seem like this running out of trees thing is something a company might have anticipated?
Yeah, you know, the company should have planned ahead. How dare you blame the company, you muling pack of ingrates? It's not the company's fault. It's never the company's fault!
They instead decide to blame the nation of so-called four-leggers across the swamp for stealing all the jobs, even though there are notably no four-leggers on staff at the We Say So Corporation.
It clearly states that all our current economic troubles are traceable to one source. Four-leggers!
In fact, the only four-legged dinosaur on the whole show is Fran's friend Monica DeVertebrae, who is immediately targeted by Earl's prejudice.
Why are four-leggeds bad?
Huh? Oh, let me explain, son.
Okay.
You see, we walk on 2 legs, and they walk on 4. So they're different, and therefore evil.
Well, I got 4 legs.
No, those are arms.
Well, I walk on them.
Oh, well, maybe you're just a little too young to understand the finer points of race hatred.
They even decide to build a wall across the swamp to keep the so-called four-leggers out. It's not that racism can't exist without capitalism, but capitalism can't exist without racism. It's too useful a tool for misdirecting public energy. The position is stated so plainly in the episode that there's really nothing left for me to even analyze.
Thanks, Mr. Richfield. I, for one, am glad to be given an easy target for my unfocused frustrations.
One of my favorite episodes is called The Greatest Story Ever Sold, in which Baby Sinclair plunges Pangaea into an existential crisis when he asks too many questions about the meaning of life.
They came from...
How did y'all get here? And why are we here? Daddy?
I don't know!
The mood is so pervasive that all of Pangaea comes to a grinding halt.
The nation is gripped by utter panic this afternoon as dinosaurs everywhere desert factories and classrooms to wrestle with never-before-asked questions of existence.
The Council of Elders is quickly convened to try and figure out what to do about it, and they decide to come up with the quickest, simplest, and most agreeable answers to all the questions so that everyone can get back to work. And because Earl is the biggest doof in all of Pangaea, he's chosen to evaluate the options. And in the end, this one wins out.
Okay, picture this. A giant magic flying potato swoops down, makes a few magical gestures, bing bang boom, universe!
A potato?
That doesn't explain anything.
No, wait a minute. Are you talking about a baked potato?
Robbie, of course, immediately questions the veracity of so-called potatoism, and is quickly arrested for heresy.
It can be an anxious and puzzling time.
We're here to help. Ow! Hey, get your hands off me!
And in the end, the only thing that saves him and Earl is a well-timed gust of wind and the support of the public, one of the few instances of systemic change throughout the entire series.
You're making this up!
Yeah, you don't have a clue!
No! Yeah, we need answers!
Here's why I like this episode so much. It's not about religion. Or at least it doesn't have to be. I think it's a much more telling indictment of capitalist realism. That's the real philosophy that no one's allowed to question. Consider the fact that the whole reason the Council of Elders even sought answers in the first place is because everyone stopped working. And just look at the kinds of questions they even bothered to answer.
Should I work late even though I'm not getting paid for it? The answer is, yes, you should.
There's a famous quote attributed to both Slavoj Žižek and Fredric Jameson, and also Mark Fisher, but he was just quoting the other two. It's easier to imagine an end of the world than an end to capitalism. What Fisher said was that capitalism seamlessly occupies the horizon of the thinkable, and it poisons nearly every effort to improve society, because society is collectivist, whereas capitalism is singularly single-minded. I have this theory, not a theory really, not even a hunch, more of a feeling in my ass. The idea that when it comes to climate change, nobody actually believes that the climate isn't changing. The science of climate change is about as well established as heliocentrism at this point, and yet people still stake their whole political identities on its disavowal. And my hunch is that it isn't a failure to come to terms with science, but of capitalist realism. I think most people understand, even on just a subconscious level, that reversing or even simply mitigating the effects of climate change will require a massive restructuring of the economy. Nothing short of a complete overhaul. We'd have to repurpose the very concept of what an economy is for. I think most people understand, even on just a subconscious level, that reversing or even simply mitigating the effects of climate change will require a massive restructuring of the economy. Nothing short of a complete overhaul. We'd have to start regulating companies in ways that restrict their ability to seek unlimited profits at the expense of the environment. We'd have to nationalize certain industries altogether, full-on expropriations. In short, we'd have to disrupt the precious free market and spend massive amounts of cash with absolutely no thought as to how we might earn it back. And that's completely antithetical to capitalist thought.
There is nothing wrong with taking one of life's most personal and intimate experiences and putting a cash value on it.
I guess the only question left to ask now is, do the problems in Pangaea reflect the problems of our own world? Well, you tell me. The entire Kentucky state legislature was practically gridlocked earlier this year when the whole assembly pulled out all the stops to make sure trans kids couldn't compete in public school sports. Want to know how many trans kids were participating in public school sports in Kentucky at the time? Give you a hint. It's less than 2. One single, solitary kid. And yet this one issue ate up all the oxygen in the state legislature for weeks, while 1 in 4 Kentucky children live in poverty, and the minimum wage stays cryogenically frozen at $7.25 an hour. That's $14,500 a year if you're working full-time. Trans people are not disposable. Fascists use marginalized communities like this to test what they can and can't get away with, and so far, America has been unspeakably pleased with letting them get away with a whole hell of a lot. Trans people do not deserve to be the wedge issue here, the canary in the coal mine, the front line of yet another fascist takeover, simply because anti-trans conservatives and spineless moderates are too busy being distracted from the material conditions to recognize the true nature and severity of this threat. Are we off topic? We might be off topic. That is, unless Dinosaurs had a trans episode.
Well, not everybody's cut out to be a carnivore, Rob. Did you ever think that maybe you're herbivore?
Look, if any conservatives are watching, I mean true blue, dyed-in-the-wool, anti-trans neocons. First of all, I appreciate you making it this far in the video, and I'm glad you're willing to listen to opinions that do not reflect your own. But let me ask you, what do you seriously think would have a bigger impact on your life? Banning trans people from the restrooms of their choice? Or literally doubling your salary? Look, you're right about the world being a mess. Okay? It's true. World needs fixing. But if you think trans people, or critical race theory, or they-them pronouns are why it's a mess, 3 things you probably didn't even know existed before 2020, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that you might have misidentified the problem. Part 4. What's any Pangaean supposed to do about it? Rewatching Dinosaurs as an adult, I pick up on a new kind of tension that I never noticed as a kid. Most of the Sinclair family's problems are systemic in nature, but they aren't in any position to seek any systemic solutions. In the season 1 episode Hurling Day, which is one of my favorite episodes of the show, Earl looks forward to throwing his mother-in-law Ethel off of a cliff, as what happens to all dinosaurs on their 72nd birthday.
One more day till I throw your mother over the cliff and into the pit.
Even Ethel's stoked about it.
I'm so excited I feel like a schoolgirl.
But Robbie sees fit to question the tradition.
Mom, it used to be that old dinosaurs slowed down the pack. Now we live in houses. It used to be that old dinosaurs couldn't hunt. Now we have supermarkets. Isn't throwing Grandma off a cliff just a waste of a perfectly good old lady?
After speaking to both Ethel and Earl and pointing out that old dinosaurs don't necessarily slow down the pack anymore, the solution is to decide, just within the family, that they're not going to kill Grandma and simply let her live to a ripe old age instead.
Earl, it's just for the rest of her life. How long can that possibly be?
How should I know, friend? Nobody ever died of getting old before.
But then herein lies the tension. Hurling Day is only abolished within the family, with the rest of Pangaea presumably still practicing. So their solution is merely personal rather than pervasive. Sometimes the characters do seek out a systemic solution, like when Monica de Vertebrae is sexually harassed at work and then goes before a committee on national television to try and explain why that shouldn't happen.
He said, and I quote, "I'll jump on your scales and you can tell me how much I weigh."
But these episodes usually end with the characters failing to effect systemic change.
It's all in good fun. And you should lighten up, Toots.
Yeah, lighten up.
Case dismissed.
Yes! There you go. The most we get by way of justice at the end of this episode is when Monica gets to bury Harris under her tail. But then maybe it's not the show's job to try and teach us how to make a better world. In fact, maybe it's making a valuable point by keeping things exactly the way they are. Because here's the thing, anti-capitalist media is not gonna save us. Most of it isn't even helping. Even dinosaurs dramatize this point. When Earl is briefly appointed head of programming for a TV station in the season 3 episode Network Genius, and promptly puts the audience to sleep by trying to educate them about social justice issues through popular media.
Don't shoot. I surrender.
We're not gonna shoot you. We want to re-educate you.
You see, son? You're just the product of an alienated economic class, lashing out because you feel powerless and unloved.
You've been disenfranchised by the bourgeois power structure.
That's right. I stole a car. I'm a thief. Well, son, if you think about it, all property is theft. Oh. Let me explain how the surplus value of the worker is being exploited in the marketplace. You see, when the means of production...
We made a few changes in the shows.
In his writings on capitalist realism, Mark Fisher singled out WALL-E as a film that purports to be anti-capitalist, which actually does more to reinforce its power. A film like WALL-E exemplifies what Robert Fowler has called interpassivity. The film performs our anti-capitalism for us, allowing us to continue to consume with impunity. Far from undermining capitalist realism, this gestural anti-capitalism actually reinforces it. According to Fisher, the problem with WALL-E is that ultimately it's the free market, not to mention more colonization, that provides the solution to all of their problems. But Dinosaurs is more than a little different in this regard. None of the mechanisms of capitalism ever save the Sinclair family, because ultimately, nothing does. Major spoilers for the series finale from here on out. In the series finale, Changing Nature, the world is suddenly overgrown by poppy vines when the bunch beetles that usually eat them every year lose their mating grounds to a new wax fruit factory.
Bunch beetles are a critical part of the ecosystem. Huh? We need them.
Hey, girlie, if we need anything, we need this factory. After all, wax fruit does not grow on trees.
Earl is then appointed head of a task force to try and figure out what to do about the poppies, and decides to spray Pangaea with a powerful herbicide in order to kill them. The plan works, but only at the expense of killing all plant life on the planet.
Unfortunately, it has also killed all other forms of plant life on the planet.
And then in an effort to bring the plants back, We Say So drops bombs into all the world's volcanoes to try and produce rain clouds. But instead of bringing rain, they bring about a nuclear winter that plunges Pangaea into a new ice age.
Hey, when the sun comes out and melts all the snow, we'll have plenty of water.
Scientists predict it may be tens of thousands of years before the sun shines over Pangaea again.
Earl frantically calls Mr. Richfield to try and explain the gravity of the situation, and we get what is one of the hallmark exchanges of the show.
I think you're missing the point, sir. The world may be coming to an end.
Well, that's a fourth quarter problem. We'll drop a bomb on that bridge when we come to it. Right now, my biggest problem is trying to figure out what to do with all this money.
That's how the world is currently set to end, by the way. Compounding climate catastrophes amidst the greatest buildup and subsequent concentration of wealth in human history. Children's shows have been calling it for 30 years.
Daddy was put in charge of the world, and he didn't take real good care of it. And now it looks like there won't be much of a world left for you or your brother and sister to live in.
Are we gonna move?
Well, no. There's no place to move to. This is the only world we got.
And I personally don't think it's in dispute so much as people just don't want to have to do the things that it's going to require in order to fix it. You don't even need theory at this point. Just look at outcomes. Every metric that measures social development has been tanking ever since Reagan took office and put our capitalist economy on steroids. Income inequality, tuition costs, healthcare spending versus health outcomes, total public debt as a percentage of GDP, housing costs as a percentage of median income, average daily temperature. Everything is getting worse. All the time. We've seen both parties take their respective cracks at fixing things, and nothing's gotten better in the last 40 years, except our ability to turn $1 million into $1 billion and $10 into 2. And it's not because the country's too socialist. The United States still denies citizenship to immigrants who are or have ever been members of the Communist Party. This is the most vehemently anti-communist country ever devised. Second most vehemently anti-communist country ever devised. And even if you want to argue that all the problems we've talked about today are not in fact capitalism's fault, that my clips from a children's television show have proved nothing, I still think it's abundantly clear that capitalism is not interested in fixing it either. In the words of Howard Zinn, capitalism has always been a failure for the lower classes. It is now beginning to fail for the middle classes. Except he wrote that back in 1980. Even the fringe benefits are long gone by now. Watch how fast I trade in my iPhone for universal healthcare. To have all this pointed out for decades, centuries even, and still see America double down on capitalism, no matter which party's in power, it boggles my tiny mind. Dinosaurs never named the ultimate problem, and it never proposed any long-term solutions. But that's what gives it so much staying power for me. The Sinclairs failed. They failed to put a stop to the systems of oppression that ultimately killed them and the planet. The failure is explicit, and the blame is pointed in the right direction.
I'm sure it'll all work out okay. After all, dinosaurs have been on this earth for 150 million years. And it's not like we're going to just disappear.
And weirdly enough, after 65 episodes, I find myself grieving them. I'm gonna miss Fran's empathy, Robbie's defiance, Charlene's resolve, Ethel's straight shooting, Baby's curiosity.
Wait a second! Bring it back where?
I'm even gonna miss Earl. He may be a boob, but he's our boob.
You're saying it's not black or white? It's a little bit of both?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Now there's something you never see on TV.
With that said, it is still just a television show, one that's wholly owned and distributed by the second biggest media conglomerate in the world, so it's not like it's going to end capitalism all by itself. In fact, I'd argue it's still very much a function and expression of capitalism more than any material indictment, which might seem maddening to hear after so much video, but all it really means is that it's high time we meet corporate, gestural anti-capitalism with an authentic anti-capitalist movement of our own. The Sinclairs might not have ever figured all that out, but I'll tell you one thing they did do. They demonstrate just how lethal it can be to convince yourself that there's no better option, that there's no better future. And recognizing that is the first step towards effecting lasting change.
The end. Beautiful story, isn't it?
Stupid! The tree pusher! He didn't learn anything! Stupid!
But did you learn something?
Yeah?
Good. Now go to sleep.
Oh, okay. Come on, Snooky. Oh, good story!
Pull. 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 Yeah.
It's so close.
God damn it.